It's June 24th, 2026, and right now tonight, U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornets are launching off the deck of the USS George H.W. Bush somewhere in the Arabian Sea. EA-18G Growlers are on station, ready to jam frequencies, and potentially jamming frequencies right now as you are watching this. E-2D Hawkeyes are running radar coverage over the Persian Gulf. MQ-9 Reapers are running near-constant surveillance passes over the Strait of Hormuz, watching every ship, every convoy, every move Iran makes. This analysis is based on open-source reporting, official CENTCOM statements, and publicly available information for educational and informational purposes. This is not a peacetime patrol posture. This is the Trust But Verify patrol, and it is running right now while Iran's diplomats sit in Switzerland and tell the world that they gave up nothing. Iran's chief negotiator said publicly, on the record, that the Strait of Hormuz will never return to its pre-war conditions. Iran's foreign ministry said there were zero plans for IAEA nuclear inspectors to enter the country. Iran's state media called the entire deal a U.S. defeat. And then here is what is actually happening on the water. Commercial ship crossings through the Strait of Hormuz have tripled in 1 week. Sanctions have been waived to allow food shipments into Iran because the humanitarian situation inside the country is that dire. Iran's negotiators keep showing up in Switzerland. And the IAEA chief said from Japan this morning that nuclear inspections are going to happen. So which is it? Is Iran winning, or are the mullahs negotiating with 2 U.S. carrier strike groups parked on their doorstep? Before we go further, drop your country in the comments right now. This channel has viewers across the United States, the UK, Canada, India, Malaysia, and a viewer wrote in this week from inside Iran itself. The perspective from inside that country on what is actually happening on the ground matters enormously to this analysis. Now here is what President Trump posted on Truth Social, and I want to read this carefully because the words are deliberate. He said Iran has informed the United States that despite troublemaking fake news reporting to the contrary, there are no tolls, no insurance costs, and no other charges of any kind being sought or received by Iran on ships traveling the Strait of Hormuz. He said if this is false information, negotiations would end immediately. He also confirmed that no money has been given to Iran or released from frozen Iranian assets. And then he added that the United States will be purchasing food from American farmers and ranchers, corn, wheat, soybeans, and delivering it to Iran because food is desperately needed inside the country. That last line is the one that sent Iran's foreign ministry to level 11 on the rhetoric scale, and I want to explain exactly why, because it tells you something important about the internal dynamics of the regime. Iran's foreign ministry called Trump's food announcement insulting. They said the United States destroyed Iranian civilization, and now Trump's big prize is enriching American corn farmers. Think about what that reaction reveals. The regime does not care that its own population is food insecure. The IRGC leadership, the clerics, the people at the top of that system, they have stockpiles. They have supply chains. They have ways of feeding themselves and their families that are completely disconnected from what 90 million ordinary Iranians are experiencing right now. A deal that feeds the Iranian people does not benefit the regime directly. It does not make the palace bigger. It does not increase the IRGC's weapons budget. And so from the regime's perspective, the announcement that food is coming to their people is not a concession worth celebrating. It is a humiliation because it makes clear to the Iranian street exactly who their government has been fighting for this entire time. That is the strategic gap that President Trump just walked straight through, and most of the corporate media coverage is missing it entirely. Now, I want to address something from the comments directly, because some of you are asking a question that deserves a real answer rather than being glossed over. A significant number of viewers this week have written in saying that this looks like capitulation, that Iran is declaring victory, that the U.S. spent over 13,000 combat sorties, deployed 3 aircraft carriers simultaneously for the first time since Vietnam, and is now sitting at a table in Switzerland feeding Iranian people corn from Kansas. I understand that frustration, and I want to give you the honest analytical answer rather than just telling you that everything is fine. Here's the thing about the 2-carrier posture that most coverage is not explaining clearly. At the peak of Operation Epic Fury, the United States had 3 aircraft carriers in the CENTCOM area of operations simultaneously. The last time that happened was decades ago, and the scale of it is genuinely historic. The USS Gerald R. Ford came home to Norfolk on May 17th after a 320-day deployment. That is the longest carrier deployment since the Vietnam War. That ship and that crew earned every day of rest they are getting. But here is the signal that matters. The United States sent 1 carrier home after the ceasefire held. It did not send 2 home. It did not send 3 home. It sent 1. The USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush are both still in the Arabian Sea right now. CENTCOM posted a public statement confirming that 2 aircraft carriers continue to operate in the Middle East as U.S. forces remain present and vigilant. That is a deliberate, calibrated signal. We pulled 1 carrier home to show that the ceasefire is being taken seriously. We kept 2 in theater to show that the blockade architecture can be reinstated at any point if Iran breaks the memorandum of understanding or fails to negotiate in good faith. The United States does not need to rebuild its force posture from scratch if this deal falls apart. It is already there. The infrastructure, the positioning, the combat experienced crews who have already traded fire with IRGC assets within the past few weeks, all of it is already on station. That is not capitulation. That is siege warfare with a diplomatic interface running in front of it. Now let me walk you through what those 2 carriers are actually deploying right now, because the hardware on those decks is the real story underneath the Switzerland headlines. The primary strike fighter currently operating from both carriers is the F-18F Super Hornet, the 2-seat variant with a weapons systems officer in the back and a fighter pilot up front. These aircraft are running combat air patrols over the Strait of Hormuz right now to ensure Iran does not target Gulf partner shipping during the negotiation period, because the pattern here is established. When the IRGC gets frustrated with the diplomatic track, their instinct is to reach for the fast attack boats and the drone launch platforms and project that frustration outward onto commercial shipping or their Gulf neighbors. The F-18F on station is what makes that instinct operationally expensive rather than operationally free. The EA-18G Growler is flying alongside it. This is the electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet, and its job is to suppress Iranian radar systems, jam communications between IRGC units attempting to coordinate an attack on commercial vessels, and blind any air defense network before a strike package needs to go in. Think about what that means in practical terms. If a group of IRGC Navy personnel is sitting in a patrol boat right now talking on encrypted radio about how to approach a cargo ship moving through the southern corridor, the EA-18G Growler overhead can jam that communication before they finish the sentence. The coordination never happens. The attack never launches. That is not theoretical. That is the operational reality of what trust but verify looks like when you have electronic warfare aircraft on continuous combat air patrol. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye backs all of this up. This is the carrier's airborne early warning and command aircraft, and it is running radar coverage over a massive section of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz simultaneously. It tracks every aircraft, every surface vessel, every pattern of movement that deviates from normal commercial traffic. When an IRGC fast attack boat leaves port, the E-2D crew sees it. When a cluster of small vessels starts moving in a coordinated pattern toward a commercial shipping corridor, the E-2D crew sees it and starts directing the response before the threat has finished forming. The diplomats in Switzerland do not operate in a vacuum. They operate with the knowledge that everything they agree to and everything Iran fails to agree to is being watched, recorded, and assessed in real time by a surveillance and strike architecture that never stands down. That is the framework that is making these negotiations mean something rather than being a press release exercise. And then there is a surveillance layer operating over the strait that most coverage is not discussing at all, and it represents where autonomous ISR is heading in every future theater the United States operates in. There are no confirmed public reports of Shield AI's expat autonomous drone being deployed in the CENTCOM area of operations right now. I want to be clear about that up front because this analysis does not invent details that have not been confirmed. But I want to talk about this platform specifically because the Strait of Hormuz scenario is exactly the operational environment it was built for, and understanding its capabilities tells you where persistent autonomous ISR is heading, whether or not this system is currently in theater. The expat is a vertical takeoff autonomous surveillance drone designed to operate from ships, remote islands, or forward positions without a runway. It runs on Shield AI's HiveMind autonomous flight system, which means it can operate in a communications-jammed environment where Iran is actively trying to blind U.S. surveillance assets electronically. When Iran jams GPS signals or pushes electronic interference into the operational frequency bands, the expat keeps operating. It does not rely on a data link that can be severed or a GPS signal that can be spoofed. That capability matters specifically because Iran has demonstrated the ability to shoot down MQ-9 Reapers and has reported success against RQ-4 Global Hawk platforms in the past. A smaller, stealthy, autonomous platform that is not dependent on the communications architecture that larger drones require is significantly harder to detect, track, and engage. 3 expat platforms fit in the deck space occupied by one legacy fighter jet at a fraction of the operating cost. The mission profile for a platform like this in the current Strait environment is persistent ISR over the commercial shipping corridor, watching ship traffic, monitoring Iranian compliance with the transit commitments in the Memorandum of Understanding, and watching for any sign that Iran is moving its enriched uranium stockpiles to undeclared locations. That last point matters enormously right now because Iran's foreign ministry said publicly that there are no plans for IAEA inspectors to enter the country. If Iran is using that window, the period before inspections begin, to relocate its 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium to facilities that are not on the declared list, that movement generates a physical signature. Vehicles move, equipment moves, people move in patterns that deviate from established routines. Space Force satellites are watching. The ISR architecture in theater is watching. And the question of whether Iran is negotiating in Switzerland while simultaneously dispersing its nuclear material is one that the U.S. intelligence community is almost certainly tasked with answering right now, regardless of what is being said at the press conferences. Now, I want to spend a moment on the comment that came in this week from a viewer who identified themselves as being inside Iran because it cuts directly to the heart of the strategic picture. They wrote that the IRGC is falling down slowly and that ordinary Iranian people are in a fight with the regime. That comment sits alongside another from a viewer asking why the US is negotiating when the IRGC is still executing people. These are not abstract political questions. They are the questions that the Iranian street is asking right now. And the answer to them is the same answer that explains why the regime's rhetoric has reached the volume it has. The regime is not performing strength for the international community. It is performing strength for its own people. When Iran's foreign ministry says the Strait of Hormuz will never return to pre-war conditions, that statement is not directed at J.D. Vance in Switzerland. It is directed at the Iranian citizen who watched the IRGC's navy go to the bottom of the sea, who watched the ballistic missile bunkers get bombed, who watched the supreme leader disappear, and who is now asking why they should continue accepting a system that just lost a war. The mullahs need the narrative of victory because the alternative, acknowledging the reality of what happened to Iran's military over the past several months, is existentially threatening to the regime's hold on power. They have been gaslighting their own people for 47 years. This is the same playbook applied to the most catastrophic military defeat Iran has suffered in modern history. And here is the trap that sits at the center of this entire situation, because it is worth stating plainly. The regime's survival depends on maintaining the appearance of strength to the Iranian street. Maintaining that appearance requires rejecting the terms of the deal publicly, even while accepting them privately in Switzerland. Rejecting the terms publicly creates the internal contradiction that makes every commitment Iran makes at the negotiating table uncertain. That loop: perform strength for the domestic audience, negotiate concessions for the international audience, use the contradiction as an excuse to walk away from commitments when the hardline factions demand it, is the exact mechanism that has made every previous Iran agreement unstable. The U.S. military posture in the Strait is the answer to that loop, not because it resolves the internal Iranian contradiction, but because it makes the cost of exploiting that contradiction prohibitively high. The blockade architecture is still intact. The two carriers are still in the Arabian Sea. The F-18S are still flying combat air patrols. The moment Iran's hardline factions push the regime to exploit the domestic performance narrative and actually break the deal, the force posture needed to respond is already in place. That is the leverage that makes 60 days meaningful rather than symbolic. Now, the global roundup, and both of these stories connect to the broader picture in ways worth noting. CENTCOM struck a senior ISIS leader in Syria this week, confirming that U.S. and partner forces remain committed to eliminating the remaining ISIS network and ensuring its enduring defeat. The significance here is not just the individual strike, it is the operational tempo it represents. The United States is simultaneously managing the largest deterrence posture in the Middle East in over 2 decades. 2 carrier strike groups, over 100 aircraft, 15,000 service members focused on Iran, and running active counterterrorism operations against ISIS in Syria without reducing the intensity of either mission. That is a force generation and operational management capability that no other military on the planet currently possesses at this scale. The second story: Ukraine struck Russia's only significant helium production facility, more than 500 miles inside Russian territory. I am going to do a full video on this tomorrow because the drone architecture used in that strike deserves its own dedicated breakdown, but the strategic significance is real. Helium is a critical industrial input for semiconductor manufacturing, medical imaging systems, and defense production processes that Russia is dependent on. Striking that facility is not a symbolic gesture. It is economic warfare targeting Russian industrial capacity. And the drone technology that made a 500-mile precision strike inside Russia possible is the same technology lineage that connects to everything we have been discussing about autonomous systems in the Strait. The drone warfare picture is accelerating faster than public doctrine is adapting, and that gap between capability and doctrine is one of the defining strategic challenges of this moment. Now let's close with the 40 chess strategic assessment, because this is where the analysis needs to be honest about what we know and what we do not. The military posture in the region is the negotiation policy. The hardware on those carrier decks, the Growlers jamming IRGC communications, the Hawkeyes watching every surface vessel in the Strait, that is not background to the diplomatic story. That is the diplomatic story. The conversations in Switzerland are meaningful only because of the force behind them. Iran's leadership is playing to two audiences simultaneously. To the international table, they are making real concessions, showing up in Switzerland, agreeing to a roadmap, accepting the food shipment framework even while publicly calling it insulting. To the Iranian street and to the IRGC hardliners, they are performing defiance. The viewer who commented that America won militarily, but Iran won strategically, is raising a real question that deserves engagement rather than dismissal. Here is the honest answer. Iran did not win strategically. A country that just lost its surface navy, its ballistic missile infrastructure, its air defense network, and whose people are food insecure to the point that the opposing side is arranging grain shipments, that country did not win strategically. But Iran's regime is still in power. The IRGC is still executing people. The enriched uranium is still somewhere inside Iran and not yet under IAEA inspection. Whether this deal produces durable change in Iran's behavior over the next 60 days and beyond, or whether it produces a temporary pause that allows the regime to consolidate and rebuild, is a genuinely open question. And the answer to that question is not going to come from the Switzerland press conferences. It is going to come from three things: whether IAEA inspectors actually enter Iran's nuclear facilities, whether the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium are accounted for and verifiably secured, and whether the IRGC hardliners find or manufacture a pretext to treat the deal as void before those two things happen. Those are the specific indicators to watch. Not the rhetoric, not the press conferences, not what Iran's foreign ministry says to its domestic audience. Here is the impossible question I want to leave you with, because there is no clean answer to it, and I think it is worth sitting with rather than resolving prematurely. If the regime's survival depends on never genuinely surrendering its nuclear capability, and if the deal requires exactly that, then the question is not whether Iran will try to find an exit ramp from its commitments. The question is whether the U.S. military posture in the region is sustained long enough and at sufficient scale to make every exit ramp too costly to use. The 60-day window is the test, not of Iran's intentions, but of whether this administration has the strategic patience and the political bandwidth to hold that posture for 60 days, while Iran's domestic performance theater runs at full volume. That is what you are watching right now, and it is more consequential than anything being said in Switzerland. Drop your assessment in the comments. Do you think the IAEA inspections actually happen within 60 days? Do you think the hardline factions find a pretext to break the deal before they do? Tell me your reasoning, not just your prediction. The analysis in this comment section is genuinely some of the best strategic thinking I see anywhere. And if you want the full breakdown of the Ukraine helium plant strike and the drone architecture behind it tomorrow, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it.